Hello, and welcome back to Tongue Tied Tales, episode 7. Today we have another interview, this time with a British gentleman who worked for Nova, both pre-2007 and post-2007, which gives him a great perspective on things. Our interview tells stories of how he met the founder and the huge difference between the Nova Ikawa of the 90s and current day. Before we get into the interview itself, our guest, who wishes to remain anonymous, asked me to add a little extra background information that he felt he'd missed when we first spoke. During his time at Nova in the late 1990s, one of his area managers was a Yorkshire man called David Peace, somebody he says was hugely respected by both Nova teachers and staff. What makes that interesting is that David Peace would later become a best-selling author, known for crime and historical fiction, including books set around both Yorkshire and Japan. Our guest told me that many people at Nova believe David actually wrote large parts of his first novels during his Nova working hours. Those early books became what's known as the Red Riding Quartet, a series of 4 novels dealing with police corruption set against a backdrop of the Yorkshire Ripper murders between 1975 and 1980, which were later adapted into films featuring some major British actors, including Sean Bean of Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones fame. He also later wrote The Damn United, a controversial novel about football manager Brian Clough, which was later adapted into a movie starring Michael Sheen. Okay, that's the background done. Let's get the interview itself rolling. Yeah, so I'll just say thank you for coming on the podcast today.
That's fine. That's fine.
And would you mind introducing yourself? I know you work at Nova currently. How did you get how did you get to Nova?
Sort of long story long. Well, I started out kind of coming to Japan, started out in Kansai, and I worked for a very small kind of what the Americans would call a mum and pop eikaiwa, which in the sort of mid 90s went belly up, just like now. So I've had that experience twice.
Oh, no.
So during the time that I was there, a lot of the contacts I'd had said, "Oh, you get your when Nova was quite good in the 90s. They get your foot in Nova. Nova's really good. If you can get in, they'll sponsor your visa." So I tried getting in with them. Eventually, it took before I relocated. A few years later, a couple of years later, after it went belly up, relocated to Tokyo. I managed to get my foot in the old Nova, and I stayed there till the new place went belly up. Till the old company with 1,000+ schools went belly up. 2007, I was still there. So pre 2007, I was at Nova in the late 90s, and it was a very good place to work. I met a lot of good friends there. Met my future wife there. So, it was a great place. It was a good place, and it had a little bit of a ladder that you could go up. It wasn't there were a lot of people who were there long term and had a sort of a career. And at the time, it was in the 90s and then the early 2000s, it was quite hard sometimes to get through some of the interviews. They were quite picky about people. So eventually managed to get in at Nova. I was there till it went belly up in 2007. Post 2007, it was changing a lot. Yeah. Did you want to?
No, because I didn't realize that you'd, I guess, work for Nova. I thought you're currently working for Nova, correct?
It's fairly recent. It's only 3 years. 3 years ago that I left and I'm doing an ALT job. It's actually 4 years. So I've been doing an ALT job for 4 years. Left in 2021. So I was at the newer version of Nova for about 14 years, and that was much better. It became a completely different animal after 2007. It was just, it was almost like you want to write a manga about it. There was so much daft stuff going on. And actually, I only recently, all the information that I'd probably be, or some of it that I'm imparting to you, I was thinking of using, I'd gathered to use props legally against them, but that wasn't really going to pan out because I didn't have enough independent sort of witnesses. But I had a lot of good evidence that could certainly scare people while I was there. So that's what I had to do post 2007. Once they had the new company and smaller company established, they tended to wanted to just grab people off the banana boat and keep. After 18 months, you would start to feel pressure to leave, or suddenly your evaluations would take a nosedive, or suddenly you were the world's worst, after being the greatest when you got off the plane, kind of thing. So a lot of people experience that. Prior to 2007, it was plain sailing. It was a lovely place to work. I met a lot of good friends there. And a lot of the old guard who stayed felt that pressure to leave. If you've been there more than 18 months, there was this kind of suddenly everything changed. You were the world's worst. It was very odd. Not for everyone, but depending on the area you had or how gung-ho the managers were. But yeah.
Because that's really for me, because I worked for Nova in 2003 and 4, and I got really interested in the collapse. And so how was it? You mentioned it was like a big mess, but what was it like working around that time? How did you get what signaled to you first that things were going, pear-shaped?
I think I just go back to a lot of old dramas I've watched online. I remember, I often think of, and I don't want to give them any praise really post 2007, but I found it was like, they took their manager model as like Ricky Gervais as Richard Brent was there. They were looking for people like that and like putting them as if they were the Messiah. So they looked for people who had no clue, couldn't sit the right way on the toilet without guidance, and just had no clue how to handle people. And a lot of people in the area, we called the manager job, we called it the Judas jobs, because the pay was 30 pieces of silver. That was the way we looked at it. It's like if you took that job, it wasn't because you were an ace teacher or you signed, it was just you were happy to do whatever you were told without question. That was my experience of, apart from a few of the managers who managed to sort of walk the tightrope and treat good people well and do the master's bidding on the other side, but most of them were just up for doing the master's bidding. That's how it seemed to me. And when you would think, when you had a glut of senior people who had loads of experience, those would be the people you promote to be mentors to it. But that never seemed to happen. All the senior people seemed to stay just as regular teachers, and they were never, ever hinted at for promotion. And none of them wanted it because they could read between the lines. So post 2007, it felt very much like, one way it felt like The Office, the other way it felt like Battlestar Galactica after the Cylons had invaded. We've been infiltrated by this strange disease that has affected everyone.
But what happened exactly, like the events that happened like around the crash, that I'm kind of interested, because you hear about some teachers just turned up and the academy, the Akaiwa was locked, or they ended up, this sort of thing.
That happened to me. Well, it didn't. It happened that it was all happening. That the pyramid of sand the castle of sand was crumbling, and we were on it, but we weren't really aware we were on it till we were up to our necks in water. So I was working at Ginza at the time of the collapse, and suddenly I went in, and there was like a couple of lessons. Then I think there had been a while where people were not quite getting paid, or paychecks were being staggered, or we'll get you next time. There's a little bit of a financial lockup we've got to sort out, and people in the end, after about 3 people just left. And I kept going to the end because I'd heard from a colleague who worked at Temple University that, you've got to stay till the bitter end to get your claim, to get money back in the long run. But people who weren't there for the long run, it didn't matter. They could jump ship and get a new job. Because I was there long term, I sort of decided to stick it out. But on my last day, I turned up. There was no staff. The phone will ring. One of the students had turned up, kind of bewildered. It was almost like a zombie apocalypse or something. It was very odd. But yeah, putting 2 and 2 together, we think, that's it. It's done. And nobody, even the loyal staff who just hung on and hung on and hung on, probably went months without pay,
Mm.
were just like, no, we're done, we're out of here. But they didn't want to, still worried about being yelled at from above for some reason. So it's very odd.
And so for you, you noticed that the House of Cards was falling down, and then
Yeah.
how did they go about, you know, finally letting teachers know maybe they'd lost their jobs, or re-recruiting staff on different terms or things like that, you know?
I was lucky because I had contact with this chap who now works at Temple University, a long-term friend. He had been a top area manager when it mattered, and he wore the little company badge, but he was one of the good guys. Um, he we kept it. He said, "Don't jump ship. It's very easy to walk out and go to Shane or wherever other small place there was. Hang on till the bitter end, and we'll see. It's probably going to come good. They've got someone who's buying them out on a smaller scale." So we waited. It was about 6 weeks, and then the new GCOM people took over in 2007, about October or something, and it all worked out. So we all gathered in one of the bigger locations, and then we were given a major school. And as the school started to come back, people were given permanent. Before that, we were just sort of randomly doing stuff, cleaning the school, sorting out the school, and sometimes doing demos. But
And
those people
were you being paid in that?
they were on that first day. They took our bank details from the previous, reassured checked what our bank details was, and assured us that we were being paid from the moment we turned up. So it was all good. And nothing. They just kind of reproduced our old paychecks. They didn't say try to cut or be shy about anything. They just gave us what we were paid previously, at least for that first year or 18 months. But they had a plan to sort of cut away the fat. They weren't going to keep everyone, so they did sort of behind the scenes, I think, let people go, or just have a number in mind, and they whittled it down to that number, I think. But it's only ever gone to about a third of what it was when it collapsed. It's only ever gone to just under 400 schools, I think, now. So it was interesting. It was an interesting time. I've often thought about if I got a storyboard and wrote a manga, it would make an amazing manga, because
Oh yeah.
no one would ever believe that it was actually true. It's sometimes I've showed my diary that I've kept to people, and they're like, oh my God. I look like someone who's gone off their meds, but I just wrote everything down. It was absolute reality. People didn't believe me. I was like, this is all true. This is the way some of these people behaved. Yeah, it was incredible.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear a bit, because you were there. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said you joined in the 90s
Yes,
originally. So for me, that was peak Nova time, from what I've heard. I spoke with
it
an Aussie
was.
guy.
That's
Yeah.
right. Absolutely right. So that was great. It was like, oh, this is lovely. This is great. I could do whatever I want. I could almost, because there were so many schools and they were all relatively successful. They weren't sort of carrying the weight for other schools. They were all good. They were all working well. There was no wrong to be done, and they were getting better and better. You couldn't choose your schedule, but if you wanted to work 9 to, you could work around it, or they could talk to someone who could make your schedule work. So you had people who were coming for cultural reason, studying calligraphy or whatever, and doing what they wanted to do and managing to do that. But post 2007, it kind of narrowed down. They were very locked in on giving the salarymen their right schedule, and the early thing only happened on the weekends and stuff. So in the 90s, it was very much the boom time. It was great. It was decent. And if you got in a good area with a good area manager, you were set. But if you had a David Brent to deal with, it was another matter. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a trainer who was very much
Oh Lord.
Nova Borg, I remember.
There are a few of those, but you could they're easy to work around because they're not too imaginative, those guys. You know, you could bluff them
Yeah.
into thinking you were doing what you're supposed to be doing, I suppose. But yeah.
I mean, what were some of your maybe funny stories or best memories of working for Nova in that time, like in the 90s, when it was all good, you know?
I think that I think people latch onto the idea that if you found a good area, that was it. You didn't have to go, and if you wanted something, you could ask for something. And I remember having an area manager who was absolutely wonderful, She was a people person. She was a good teacher. She let all the things that you would want a boss to do or a mentor. She could tick all the boxes. She was an excellent teacher. She had an excellent background. She knew all her students were they were kind of sad when she went to management because they missed her lesson. That you could see them disappointed for her being promoted, which was pretty impressive. Stuff like that. And then all of those people all good people tended to come together and stick together. There was a nice sense of camaraderie in different areas, even though the areas were quite big. So that was interesting. So I made quite a few friends that I've some still got today as well. So
I mean, did you have any like really interesting students? Like, because I worked in the countryside and yeah, I had one lady who bought all the lesson seats and always talked about Adam Sandler movies.
I remember you saying that. That
Yeah.
really made oh, that's hilarious. We had some people. We had some. I was in a sort of Tokyo suburban area, and there were things that people did. Sometimes the trainers were a bit relaxed. So we had one school where they would select and make nicknames. It's probably completely politically incorrect now, but it worked really well. So we sometimes have difficulty remembering names, but there was a list of nicknames. Some of them were not terribly nice, but some of them were absolutely spot on. So if you couldn't remember what the salaryman's name was, oh, he's the guy with glasses who never sense anything. He always sits at the back. So you'd have students that had a 3-phrase nickname, and everyone knew who they were. That we had a guy who I don't know. I'd have trouble being nice to him now. He was almost like Hannibal Lecter. He'd be incredibly nice. He could be incredibly nice and charming, and then the minute you turn around, he'd stab you in the back, or he'd complain, or he had this hideous American accent. He talked like a I call him the midnight DJ, and a lot of people called him the Dominator. So he'd be like, "Hi, how are you today? How you doing?" He had this awful fake American accent. All of the Brits and Australians used to be driven up the wall by him. And he was incredibly strong and confident. He'd obviously lived in the States and he really didn't need Nova. He just came for a bit of amusement or a bit of henpecking he came to wind up the teachers. But it was interesting. It was interesting. Midnight DJ was his other nickname. With people like that, it's like, the Midnight DJ's here, you better keep it high level or maybe pull it low level just to see his reaction kind of thing. So some areas people had students with nicknames, but they couldn't remember the original students' names necessarily. Their nicknames kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Like a big label.
That was funny. Yeah, I mean, so would you describe like the culture among the teachers you work with as you said, yeah, you had a supportive manager, some of them maybe just into partying, you know?
Some I think some of the newer teachers and the managers tend to, when they were shown, there was at the time there was an actual ladder that you could climb. You could be a regional area manager, and if you'd started, you got bonuses every year, and you were considered like one of the Japanese people. So you got some decent money. I mean, the time when the teaching money was decent and the manager's money was decent, people were making okay amounts of money and bonuses if they got pushed onto the Japanese side. So they were fairly serious, but they didn't take themselves too seriously. They had that nice balance of helping people out, but not being a Legoland Nazi type of thing, which is what I experienced post 2007. They're all wannabe miniature Donald Trumps kind of thing.
Speaking of that, like the founder of the company, I mean, I got a story about him from an Australian guy interviewed, and he sounded quite kind, you know, Nozomu Sahashi.
He seemed it. I'd seen him at end of year parties, and he seemed everything that you read about him in the blurb in the good times. He seemed really good. He seemed like this kind of cool guy, sleek, slim. I don't know that he was maybe he's married and sort of young, free and single, but I seen him like pull teachers out onto the dance floor. He saw this blonde bird kept going after it. He like pulled her out onto the dance floor. So he had this almost sort of Tom Cruisey vibe about him, or he was very confident and he spoke English quite well. And his second in command was one of the foreign staff. So, you know, he wasn't, you know, the gaijin go here, we go here. He was very, very open-minded, which is why what prompted him to start the company, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I found his life story really interesting. That he went to France, failed at physics, and then ended up in, I think it was Denmark, studying languages, English. Then he came back and founded Nova. So so you actually saw him in these
I've
parties.
seen him on many occasions because it was so different in the 90s when they had lots of money flying around and they'd open a school wherever it was almost like a sort of careless Starbucks. If they had a relatively decent sized, because I think Starbucks do these kind of really intense research before they open a Starbucks anyway. It's got to be a decent sized station. If they had a decent sized station, they'd be like, okay, open an Nova almost. And that's what caused it to bubble up into
Yeah, because there was
something
talk about like
giant.
going for locations like Starbucks or McDonald's would now in busy subway
That was
stations,
their
this type of
approach,
thing.
yeah. Because that was their motto, wasn't it? Eki Mai Ryugo, a big school in front of the station. And it had to be a decent sized station. So
I mean, do you
um,
think there was anything underhand going on? There's so many rumors about them, to
is
get
it
these locations.
mm, um are you the same chap that made that podcast about Nozomi? Is that you? Or I heard a really great podcast about the sort of downfall time, and there's a certain amount of talk about him meeting with people and what happened after 2007. There is a podcast about that. It sounds very. There's a little bit of fiction in there, I think, but I think there was a lot of talk. A lot of people said common sensely, thinking logically, if you went to Nova like in Ebis, they had a huge billboard with a
Mm.
Nova sign to actually get that advertising. It's a bit like real estate in New York. That was my take on it. And I've asked my wife about this. She goes, yeah, if you've got you need connections to get a billboard that size and to get your name on it. For an Eikaiwa school, he would have to have some kind of slightly dark side connection. So there is talk that yeah, he may have been in hock to people that he shouldn't have been, or to get a big ball rolling, you need big capital, and he maybe needed loans from somewhere, and maybe it all went a bit wrong. There is talk of that. There's a lot of talk of that, and logically, it's a bit like real estate in New York. To get that, somewhere along the line, there's a little bit of darkness that you have to go through. It's not all cut and dried. I'm sure he had some dark connections behind the scenes, at least. Logically, that would have to happen. I've asked a lot of Japanese people. They said, yeah, he would have to have some kind of a slightly dark connection to get those loans, or to get an advertising billboard like that so quickly.
Because post collapse particularly, there's not much about him. He eventually got put in prison for embezzlement for a
He was
short
just
time.
in, yes, yes. I think that was just unfortunate. Um, I think he started shifting things and using things for the wrong thing at the wrong time, and he ended up being the fall guy for it. If he'd got someone else to move it round, he might have been all right. But he was just in the wrong. I think he was just very naive, perhaps. He moved where he perhaps once or twice used the funds inappropriately, so that set him up for for the white collar police coming around and getting him, I think.
I mean, does anyone hear anything of him really in the last sort of 10 years? I mean, he seems to have disappeared.
I think, yeah, comeback because for something like that, especially in Japanese society, is pretty unlikely unless he completely reinvented himself. So I've not heard anything. I'm assuming he's out of prison, but I don't think he's out. But I've not heard of any kind of comeback. Um, and once the name was sold on, once those new guys took over, I think he'd have to reinvent himself. Which
But at the
so
time, like in his heyday in the 90s,
yeah,
he was out there with teachers and staff it sounds in a very
yes,
nice kind of way.
yes. I remember everyone would pass this, like, if you go in and you clean up and you kind of show willing on the day before the last day, you all get invited to the big bash, the end of year, which was wine flowing and lots of nice food and people smiling, and all your favorite staff in one place. So it was great. And people did that. It was like, let's do that if we're here, let's do it. And as long as you went in and helped the staff, which they appreciated anyway, it all worked really well. So it had a nice vibe to it, pre early 2000s, I think. Pre 2007 anyway. It was all very, very cut and dried and very
I
nice.
remember like the Japanese staff were very dedicated to Nova, and they wanted to go. There was an annual conference, and it seemed not like a religious event, but they were very excited and took it very seriously. And when I said I was leaving, quitting, they were. I could tell they were not very impressed.
They thought that you might be one of the guys who stayed on, or moved up the ladder or something. I suppose they look at it as a regular Japanese company. It wasn't really, but they took, oh, you're here for the long haul kind of thing, I suppose, the way they looked at it. And some of them were there since they graduated. But yeah, I think in recent years the turnover is different. But
yeah. So now post 2007, you talked about how it's a completely different animal.
Yeah. I think my previous comment about the Battlestar Galactica is it's almost like we've been infiltrated. It literally was like everything changed. I kept in contact with the manager who told me to stay because he was one of my best mates, and tended to follow him round. If I stick in his area, it'll be fine, which was fine. But a lot of the time, he wasn't quite where he was before. They were kind of making use of him as a teacher rather than maybe using his experience. So even he started to get a lot of pressure to move. So everyone was kind of busted back to private, really. And instead of just injecting money and adding common sense, they had to reinvent the wheel. They reinvented the wheel, which didn't need to be reinvented, and I think made a mess of it. Like, for example, the voice room, they got the voice room pretty much been erased, which was one of their best things, I think. All they had to do was inject people, keep it going, and the old school people would have come back knowing, that old thing that we loved is still there, but they had to they had to cut off their nose to spite their face kind of thing. It was false economy, so they couldn't lay out for something they couldn't see loads of students turning up for. But you didn't realize, probably, if you look at the long term, they never looked at the long picture, the long term. We'll save a few 100,000 then because we don't need an extra teacher for voice. But you didn't realize that like 50 or 100 students who are going to pay 200,000 or 500,000 yen to roll up just for voice would come. If you had it and you'd built it, they would have come, but they just sliced that away and drove those students away. They had no long-term view, I think, which is a shame. It was all about the cash now.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, so to talk a bit about yourself personally, Tony, I mean, what brought you to Japan and what kept you there? If you tell me a bit more, because that's always interesting to know.
Okay. I arrived in the 90s. I was a bit of a sort of let's fight in pajamas type guy. I loved karate and judo and stuff.
Oh, like me too. I was into karate big time. Great.
Excellent. So same kind of thing. So I loved that, and I enrolled in different types of schools and tried to keep that as my sort of gym. I've been doing that up until recently, but always loved martial arts and that kind of culture, and been into that. I've been into karate and stuff in university and tried to keep that going. So I was doing that a little bit, wanted to get a little bit fluent in the language. Kind of just along the way happened to meet my wife, so it all became sort of rather semi-permanent, really, which is nice, and so very settled. So it was all being here, absorbing the culture, absorbing the language, doing a bit of martial art. It was all of those things.
Let me see, because you've really given me a great overview of sort of the journey of Nova, I guess. Was there any kind of really funny story you have about Nova at all when you were working there? Anything that really sort of...
I mean, the camaraderie was one thing. I think the best sort of and the funniest times are always, I think, pre-2007. But I think camaraderie was one thing. What else? I think was that there were all these rules laid out when you went to do your initial training. They'd lay down the law. I think they were quite paranoid about people stealing students, even though the lessons were relatively cheap. Stealing students or dragging them off to a love hotel or something. They were quite worried about losing their young female employees or students to naughty gaijin. I think that was that was a bit of a thing, or perhaps there was, a bit of, we've laid down the rules, but the rules are made to be broken. A lot of people looked at it that way. So I think people were fairly careful about that, but they're like, nah, rules are made to be broken. So it really depended on who was watching or who your manager was, and if they were really kind of black and white about everything. So it was quite funny the way people bent the rules and went, yeah, whatever. There's another Eikaiwa down the block. I can go there if I get caught out. So for guys who were young, free and single at the time, I think, they were like kids in a candy store sometimes, perhaps. And I've read a lot of comments like that on Reddit. So, but I think after a short period of time, people would be like, whatever, rules are meant to be broken, doesn't matter.
Did that, the infamous kind of no fraternization with students rule cause any issues at all?
I think it's I suppose it's like it depends on who's ringing the bell at the bar, kind of at closing time. It's like that. It really depended on who was in charge and how much they wanted to enforce things. I think that they had said that the reason they were so gung ho about that at the orientation was that people had taken it too far, or people had bent the rules and completely destroyed some schools' reputations, apparently, but I never saw much evidence of that. But perhaps there were some dodgy, very scary incidences for some people that might have bankrupted some small schools or sent Nova into a court case or something, and they were very paranoid about that. So no fraternization suddenly became part of the contract, which not really it's not really doable. You can't control someone's private life, can you? So, but they like to, for people who got off in the beginning, Nova had some problems with it, and they decided to enforce it a bit more. People who bent and broke the rules just blatantly, rather than staying under the radar kind of thing. So,
but I'm glad we could finally connect today. Yeah. But as a closing comment, I mean, it sounds like that you're just pointing out a real clear divide between pre-2007 and post-2007 Nova.
Yeah. I only stayed past 2004 because they started trying to push me. I was like, no, I don't want, I'll stay where I want to work. So I was really determined. I was, in my mind, I thought, I want my Braveheart moment. I want to send in the Irish with the javelins, or the spears. I mean, when you look at post 2000, how many times they've been sued? The new guys have no like push on vision. They don't think about keeping the good people. They think about the next batch of people who might come. Kind of does seem to be that sort of approach, which is a shame, because it's completely the opposite of what it was in the early 2000s or 90s in a way. When people stay more than 2 years, they've been reading a lot on Reddit. They're like, oh, you could have the nicest guy in the world, but the nicest guy in the world has always got to kind of get some brownie points somewhere along the line. And that's more evident than ever, I think, with the newer Nova anyway.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like they're as well compensated either relative to back in the day.
So you'd read back in the day that there would be, for any Eikaiwa, there would be a kind of basic minimum of 250 grand a month, and now they're trying all sorts of ways to push that lower and push it beyond livable. So, and Nova's into that, and then they're almost charging you to work. It's just quite crazy if you're an IC person. So yeah, people who have employee contracts, the old style contracts, are very, few and far between now. They've generally been kind of pushed out, and they cut people's hours so then they want to leave. That was one of their tricks. They cut it down so that even if you're flat out with lessons, you're not earning enough to really survive comfortably, so you have to move on, kind of thing. Especially with people in their spending plan and a saving plan, and then they slice the saving plan away, so you kind of only just about their trick now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a shame. But I feel like generally the golden days of kind of teaching English abroad were maybe like the 90s, the 80s,
sure,
90s, probably.
sure.
Yeah.
I read that a lot already, and it's really true.
Sadly, our 40 minutes of free Zoom time ended here, but I'd like to thank my guest, my mystery guest, once again. Next time, I will wrap up the Nova and Japan tale and move on to yet another tongue-tied tale. See you there, and if you feel you have a great teaching or travel tale to tell, please get in touch.